Этот спикер будет уже онлайн, поэтому возможности подойти и задать все вопросы не будет. Воспользуйтесь этой возможностью сейчас, после его выступления. Это Джон Broxis. Он управляющий директор в OpenBanking Europe и OpenBanking Exchange. Это организации, которые собирают вместе людей для создания универсальных, безопасных и эффективных платежей в Европе и не только. Организация OpenBanking Europe внесла и продолжает вносить очень значительный вклад в развитие OpenBanking в Европе. И сегодня Джон поделится с нами своим опытом, европейским опытом, опытом UK.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be here. So my name's John Broxis. I'll do a couple of introductions in a second. Now I think you can all hear me. I can't actually hear you, but I'm sure people will sort of message me a bit as we go. Perhaps if the organisers could just enable the screen sharing, then I can put up the screen and start my presentation. While that's happening, I have to apologise for two things. Firstly, that I'm not speaking to you in Ukrainian Russian. I'm afraid I can only do English or Arabic or French, and I think English is probably the best choice of those. And secondly, I'm not with you physically. I wish I was. I'm actually at Money 2020 in Amsterdam, a big industry payments conference, as many of you will know. So I can't be here with you, but I'm very pleased that I've been allowed to join you virtually. So I've just been given screen access to share. So I'm going to put this up. I believe everybody can see that now. And I'll be talking for the next 20 minutes or so, really on the topics, a little bit about who we are. And then I want to look a bit about open banking around the world, in Europe, a lot of the use cases we're seeing, and some of the challenges that have taken place in order to get there, and some of the learning outcomes that we've had in getting to there. At a point where Ukraine is starting or is on its journey towards open banking. So a few words about the company. OpenBanking Exchange is a brand under a company called OBE SAS. It's a not-for-profit global movement for industry stakeholders supplying open banking, open finance, and open data services. We really help regulators, we help self-regulatory organizations and national communities to implement effective open banking solutions based on a jurisdiction-neutral technical and functional framework. And we're part of the Consensus Group. And while personally I'm based in Paris and our activities have so far been European, we're working with Sigma Software within the Ukraine as a local partner. So to move on to myself, I'm John Broxis, Managing Director at OpenBanking Exchange, and I've had about 20 years experience of collaborative payment systems. I ran Step 2, which is Europe's largest clearing system. I helped build the ISO 20022 standards that are now being implemented into the Ukraine as well. I was in the European credit transfer and direct debit schemes, helped build them. And within PSD2, which is of course Europe's regulation that brought in open banking, I was in various working groups run by the central bank, part of the Berlin Group, Next Generation Task Force that was one of the groups doing standards in Europe, and created Open Banking Exchange as a program as I've just described. The broad vision and purpose is around the idea that open banking, open finance, open data is becoming a global phenomenon. It's amazing how much it's spreading, and there's a huge amount of belief in what it can do, and we're starting to see some of the transformation happening through open banking. But there are risks. Generally, risks around fragmentation across different financial institutions, countries and regions, and confusion over terminology and how rollout happens slows down the pace of growth in different countries. And we can talk a little bit about some countries which have taken one approach and are doing quite well, other countries which have taken another approach and are struggling. So I think it's important that now as Ukraine moves forward, you can take best practices and learn lessons from other countries. We really operate by bringing market players together to help turn requirements into an operational reality through collaboration. And we have quite a strong framework for implementing an open finance or open banking program in any given country, which I'll point out in a moment. Here are some of the stakeholders that are part of our community in Europe. So you see a lot of the big banks on that list. You see some of the TPPs and fintechs on the right-hand side, but also the service provider community. And in Europe, in the EU, we have QTSPs that do digital certificates, and they're also part of our ecosystem. So it's bringing people together to have the right discussions to get things done. Now, just say a few words around what's happening in open finance in different countries. Again, it is a global phenomenon, and we can take country by country. I'm just going to go through 4 or 5 examples of how different countries are rolling out open finance. So start with the EU, one of the first to mandate open banking with PSD2, focusing on payment accounts. Their approach was really around legislation. There's no central scheme. There are no central standards or infrastructure, except where market players have come together and started creating them. And that's led to a certain amount of fragmentation. One of the problems in Europe as well is the fact that different country central banks are responsible for policing, and they don't always have the same opinions. So there are some frictions within Europe, but it was one of the fundamental starting points. The principles they've got are very good and very clear. And we're currently in an open payment space, not even open banking, but open payments. It was payment accounts only. But as we finish this year and go into next year, the discussions are now going on around open finance and what that means across Europe. Australia is another great example that a lot of people hold up as a success story. They really went for open data right from the beginning with the consumer data right, and then a phased approach of different sectors that had to come into that overall data scheme, with banking being the first one. And you can see they've also got different phases around there with banks in a phase 1, and then loans and closed accounts and direct debits and scheduled payments in phase 2, and then moving into other assets in phase 3. Brazil has a program. Again, it's phased. Firstly, around institutions sharing their own products and public data. Then it's about personal data. Then it's about payments. We have Hong Kong, who are using APIs and rolling that out. Mexico has a slightly different rhythm as well, and slightly different choices. So I don't want to go through everything kind of one by one, but we can see the spread and the take-up from these different communities. I will just spend a moment talking about the UK, where the Financial Conduct Authority regulates different entities, but OBIE, the implementation entity, has created a very strong scheme and framework. And in fact, probably the best case we've got of open banking, open finance take-up, where we see quite a strong growth month after month, now up to about 800 million API calls per month. And they say around 4 million active open banking users. We're now seeing the UK government tax authorities implementing open banking for payments. And yeah, a very strong implementation. Not everybody's happy with all of it, but they certainly are one that attracts a certain amount of attention. Changing from different countries just to different use cases, we've spent a lot of time in OBE going through the user cases that are being offered to consumers And we've gone through every TPP, every fintech in Europe to categorize all of the services that they're offering into 6 categories and 23 different types of service. And you can see that they're doing services around managing funds, so account aggregation being the most obvious, but also involves helping consumers to switch or save in an automated way. Trust, which is around using financial data for credit scoring, transaction monitoring, or know your customer type operations when giving loans or renting out property. We're seeing insights where people are using the financial data to create profiles or business intelligence or using it in loyalty programs. Payments, of course, is I guess fairly straightforward. But also open banking is being used to help in administrative type services in small businesses, where we're seeing auditing happening through open banking transactions, and we're seeing things like cash flow management being provided to small businesses by using financial data. And there is some screenshots here and a bit of animation of one particular TPP, which is TrueLayer, giving an example of how account aggregation works, the idea that you can load many different banks into one sort of app and see your business across all those banks through a single view. So this is probably the most basic open banking service that is provided. But as I said, there's a lot more out there, and we've got quite a lot of information and data about all of these claims and all of these open banking enabled services that are being offered to consumers based on open banking, open finance methodology. So that's good. We see a country spread. We see success in some countries more than others, depending on timetable and where they are in the process. But as I said, there are also some challenges with open banking and open finance. It's very confusing to start off with. Everybody has a slightly different idea of what open banking, open finance means, depending if you're a technologist involved in APIs or security, depending if you're a payments expert, depending whether you're a lawyer or a compliance officer, depending whether you're somebody looking to monetize and make things for businesses. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of ecosystem players, and it's really important to get the same view of what's going on. Otherwise, you can end up with every single bank providing APIs, but frustration because everybody's sort of locked out of each API and they have to do very manual, very difficult processes, case by case to get going. And this is not what we want. This is the result of fragmentation, and we want a harmonious, standardized approach, which will really promote security and interoperability. So a few words on this slide around the same kind of thing. I don't think I'll spend too long sort of reading them out. But it's also then worth mentioning that standardization will happen at different levels. Any country is always going to be most interested in its national success and national conformity. But then there's regional as well, where we could consider perhaps a European bloc as being the right region to think of in terms of Ukraine. But it's a global game, right? Data doesn't really know any limits. People don't know limits. They're working in different countries. Financial institutions are operating around the globe, and so we're clearly not at a level of global standards right now, but the discussion is more and more happening in that direction. And one of our sort of missions is to go and try and explain and to take the different standards that are out there to different communities around the world, and to share what's happening so that people can make choices that move towards a common direction. So how, what do we do to help all of this? I think there's three pillars that are really important from the from the learning that we've done. Firstly is a framework around the different components that will be or may be required by a country. The second is something we call the handbook, which is the best practices, the chapter headings, the rules and decisions that every country is making. And finally, probably most importantly, is the community. How do the different actors who sometimes have different opinions or different requirements, different desires, how do they work together to get something that is agreed in a correct way? And regulators have a lot to do with this around how they approach open banking and how they set up different open banking different communities. Sometimes it's completely market led, sometimes it's very regulator pushed, sometimes it's a little bit in the middle. Most cases, in fact, it's that. But we've seen all of these examples and have a program that helps a community go through the right path to understand what they should be thinking of within open banking. So I'll just spend a moment on the framework itself, which you read from left to right, and it has the idea of bringing a program management office together. And I know in the Ukraine, you have started groups, and groups are now forming to have these discussions and to bring people together. There will be standards being created and a regulatory framework, which we know is now underway within the Ukraine. But then there are various infrastructure components that are needed in order to ensure that what is been produced in terms of paper and standards is actually being implemented and that customers are getting a good outcome. And we can talk about certificates, we can talk about transparency directories, we can talk about central statistics. I was able to show you UK figures because in the UK they're actually collecting data, and that's one of the rules, and so that you can actually measure what is happening. The community is a very important part that we run, but is different in each country, and the handbook really helps people understand why the different elements are needed. I'm coming to the end before we move into questions, but I think 5 key things that I would say as something to learn from what we've seen that's been done well or done badly in different places. Firstly, do think about central infrastructure, whether that's a help desk or whether that's a reporting tool. Just publishing an API standard is not enough. Think about incentives and business models. Compliance driven certainly gets things started, but you do need to parties have to want open banking to work, not just to produce the minimum API they can that meets the regulators' requirements, but to produce the best API that they can that will actually get used. Think about testing platforms, sandboxes, and reference sites. It's about getting the fintechs involved. It's about making sure that standards that are produced are actually being rolled out properly so that you have that interoperability that I mentioned earlier. And think about education, both to end customers who will be very unsure about open banking, and to them it may feel quite scary if you talk about sharing their financial data with other people, but also education to the wider market who may not be involved in the working groups which decide how things will be rolled out. And there's something to be said about user experience guidelines or mandatory text as the user journey happens. And finally, think about what happens when things go wrong. It's nice to build an API and think about what happens when it goes right, but what happens when there are disputes, when there's reporting, when there are problems that you need to then report and share in order to solve problems in a collaborative way. So they're the broad things we're doing. We're doing this in a lot of different countries. In Europe, which is where we started. We created the basic kind of business flow that is now used by banks and TPPs. We created the standardization of the reference numbering system across different countries. We were part of the ETSI working groups who created the certificate standards for PSD2, and we created a way of reading the directories in different countries to understand who actually participated and didn't. We're now rolling out programs in different countries at a membership level, and we're also advising central banks and the World Bank in different areas, such as Asia, where we're working through the World Bank, to educate them of some of the things they need to think about. So, Ukraine, you've got a 2025 strategy for development of fintechs. You've got a payment service law, which is around adopting PSD2 type infrastructure. I know there's an open API group under EMEA, and here we are in this Global Payments Day. So clearly, these things are happening within the Ukraine, but we would love to help, to bring our knowledge here. We're in discussions with Open API Group, again through our partnership with Sigma in the country. So in the end, thank you very much for listening. We're here to help. I'm open to any questions you may have.
Так, да, я думаю, что Джон, к сожалению, не услышит аплодисменты, потому что у нас проблемы со связью, но...
Great. So I see the organisers are going to start texting me some questions because I'm not getting audio into this, but it'll be interesting to see what comes through.
Да, у нас будет интересный способ передачи вопросов. Мы будем их писать через Zoom, поэтому если у кого-то есть вопросы, мы их сразу будем транслировать в Zoom, задавать Джону, и он будет отвечать.
Есть. Вопрос. Возникла мысль, хотелось бы спросить Джона, как сейчас в UK или Европе, неважно, насколько банки адаптировались к новой реальности, связанной с OpenBanking и той конкуренцией, которую они сейчас, наверное, испытывают? Они как-то видят бизнес уже или все-таки все еще находятся в процессе адаптации? Можно
Спасибо большое.
Более кратко спросить.
Да, для Украины актуально. Можно спросить, have the UK banks adapted to the new open banking realities? Что-то в этом роде. Я думаю, что это обширный вопрос.
So I've got a question around, the question is, have the UK banks adopted to the new open banking realities? That's a good question. I have to say, I live in France myself, so I am British, and I'm certainly following what's happening in the UK. I'm going to say yes. It's been a journey. I think 4 or 5 years ago, the banks were outraged. There was an idea that they would have to share their customers' data with people they didn't know, and this was emotionally very difficult. But they went through the different stages of grieving, if you like, from disbelief to anger to despair to acceptance, and now they're not only accepted it, but are in fact using it, and I think quite proud of it. A lot of people have put a lot of time into building open banking infrastructure, and now when they see people using that infrastructure, real consumers actually using it, it makes, at a human level, makes the people, very pleased to see it. And of course, we're also seeing that the banks have opportunities here. It's not just that they have to sit there waiting for other people to take their data. We're seeing that they're all offering account aggregation services themselves. So if I log into my UK bank account, I can see my balance and my details, not only for that bank, but for any other banks that I bank with in the UK. I think they're excited by the idea that APIs will allow them to sell, let's say, sell mortgages to people who are not customers of that bank, for example, that the open economy allows them to get a wider reach for their products. I mean, right now, if I bank with a bank, let's say HSBC, but I see a mortgage that I really like from Royal Bank of Scotland, I typically would have to move my account, open an account with Royal Bank of Scotland to take that mortgage. But the promise of APIs is that maybe I could still have my HSBC relationship, but I could buy a Royal Bank of Scotland mortgage through them. So there is a lot of discussion and a lot of hope that we will move beyond payment accounts and some of the simpler services into more advanced services like subscription for products, and to a wider range of account types. So yeah, they don't all love it straight off. It's been a lot of effort, but I think they're kind of convinced now that this actually helps them service their customers better, and so is a good thing.
Пишите, пожалуйста, спасибо Джону за ответ на вопрос такой очень обширный. Есть ли еще какие-то вопросы в зале? Я тогда, возможно, от себя спрошу. Мне просто интересно, кстати, хотела спросить там к Джону, не к Джону вопрос, но по поводу каких-то таких вот extraordinary cases использования Open API. Допустим, вот таких, которые тестируются в регуляторной песочнице FCA. Я думаю, что мне помогут спросить этот вопрос. Просто интересно что-то такое услышать. Часто говорили про агрегаторы, часто говорили про приложения, которые помогают с финансовой отчетностью, что, в принципе, будет, мне кажется, мега популярно с тем, что у нас рынок капитала будет развиваться, и все больше как бы идут в инвестиции, но хочется вот что-то такого супер-супер экстраординарного. Мы посмотрим. Задали вопрос, да?
Okay, so I've got another question through around extraordinary cases of open banking usage. So I won't say extraordinary, but I'll tell you two things that I think is really, really interesting. I mean, the first thing is a general point that says consumers do not know that they're doing open banking. Some people say, oh, we should be telling the consumers more about the benefits of open banking. But what I like is that we're starting to see the relevance of bank data in normal other type of transactions that people do. To give you an example, if I want to rent a flat, then I might have an estate agent, and they need certain proofs from me that I am actually, I have sufficient salary, or that my income is enough in my bank account. Currently, this involves emailing PDFs of bank statements, or faxing, sending copies of pay slips, for example. Now we're seeing fintechs, TPPs offering a quick check directly into the bank account, real time, using bank data to prove, to be able to do that credit checking, or to be able to check that I'm over 18 as I go onto a gambling site, or to check that I, have a certain transaction pattern when I'm taking a loan. So I think the idea that the open banking service is actually bundled inside something bigger is quite important. So we now talk about open banking enabled services that the consumers see, where they may or may not really see that they're doing, sort of open banking. I think the ability to do sweeping is really nice, and by sweeping I mean you can set up an account aggregation service that looks at 2 or 3 different bank accounts, maybe across banks, maybe in the same bank, and you can give an instruction, say, well, if this particular account ever has less than 500 euros in it, could you move money from this other account and keep it topped up, please? So I think that's nice, and along that, things with automated saving, automated charity giving. There's a few things there really to help financial management. So that these are good use cases. I think the other piece that we don't talk enough about is helping corporates, helping small businesses. We think a lot about consumer use cases, but small businesses have a lot of paperwork to deal with, a lot of administration. They're paying people to issue invoices, reconcile transactions coming in, follow up and query things. open banking is also allowing them to do things in a much more efficient, much faster way. COVID has shown that we have to be able to work digitally. It's really accelerated things. And I think open banking has helped that both at the business level and at the personal level. So I don't know if those are extraordinary use cases of open banking usage, but very real, very meaningful use cases to real people that make a difference.